everyone, welcome to another episode of Social Justice in Women's Hockey. Erica Ayala here. I want to set up this episode with Harrison Browne quickly for you. Harrison Browne is the first man we had on this podcast, Social Justice in Women's Hockey. Very glad that the two-time Isobel Cup champion was willing to join. We are going to talk about some themes that you'll hear a lot in this series, of course, racism and anti-racism, as well as allyship. But Harrison Browne and I also talk about transphobia, as well as thinking differently about Pride celebrations in Pride Month in wake of the news cycle surrounding George Floyd's death, Breonna Taylor's death, and unfortunately, many, many more. So I appreciate Brownie getting into that. You'll hear me reference his YouTube channel, popping the link up here as well as in the descriptions. Please go check that out. It was certainly a great resource for me. I mentioned you can play, other things of that nature. Also, you can find that in the show notes. Question of the episode with Harrison Browne. How do you define gatekeeping? Yep, how do you define gatekeeping? Harrison and I talk a little bit about that within the context of anti-racism work, work on behalf of LGBTQ plus people and allyship. So think about that term gatekeeping. How do you define gatekeeping? Before we head over to the episode, I want to remind you to subscribe to Social Justice in Women's Hockey. We have had Blake Bolden, Ali Thunstrom, Soraya Tinker, Liz Knox on the show so far, and our next episode will feature Rebecca Morse and Madison Packer, captains of the Metropolitan Riveters. Moose Packer and I run through 6 key questions when talking about anti-racism. It's a really great conversation. Don't want to miss that. So if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and do that now. Without further ado, here is my interview with Harrison Browne. It is so good to connect with you, Brownie. How have you been?
Yeah, no, it's great to see you. Great to see your face, hear your voice. It's been a while. I'm trying to think when was the last time we connected.
I think it was probably for Pride in New York City last year.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was awesome. That was so much fun.
That was actually my first Pride parade. I think actually ever. And I've been in New York my entire life. Always knew that the Pride parade was a huge deal, but I just never went. And so being able to march with, it was kind of you can play an NHL family, but I was there as a guest of Black Girl Hockey Club. And my goodness, that was amazing. And that was like the World Pride parade that year too, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say you picked a really good one to do your first one. You had like a double-decker bus. Like it was, the people there, the groups that were there. It was really cool to see like hockey kind of come together in that space.
Yeah, and it was cool for me because I talk a lot when I'm asked about like how I got into hockey and stuff, and I always say, because it's true, Black women got me into hockey. And Black women have always given me the opportunity to experience hockey in a way that I honestly never would have before. And that also was the case with World Pride. It was funny though, because there were a few of us that were, kind of marching, or we were supposed to march in front of the bus, but then the bus left before us. And so we literally had to run up to catch you guys.
That's the thing with World Pride. I think we were delayed for a long time. I think it's just that amount of people, but it worked out.
It worked out. We made it and had a great time partying with you. I had heard you speak of Stonewall before, and again, being in New York, I even went to grad school in that area because I went to NYU. And so I'd known a lot about Stonewall, but again, had never experienced that. So actually, I want to maybe start there because we are in Pride Month, and I believe this is 50th anniversary, right, of celebrating?
Yeah. But yeah, no, Stonewall, I've been a couple times, because playing in the Riveters, I lived in Jersey actually for the season, but I made my way a lot to New York, and there's a ton of like gay history there. So it was really cool to just be in that environment. But yeah, like Stonewall's it's a big cornerstone in the movement of Pride. Yeah, where it all
Yeah.
started, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's Marsha P. Johnson, I believe, and
Yeah.
the riots, and that was a time. So we're talking the 1970s in New York City, and from what I understand, Stonewall, and like you said, there's a lot of different places where it was a space where people from the LGBTQ community just felt that they could be their authentic selves. And what I think is interesting about the history, at least the history that I know about Stonewall, is that and this is what you and I, we had chatted offline about, talking about, intersectional social justice. And, Marsha P. Johnson, transgender woman, but known to be kind of the spark for Stonewall riots, because, as I understand, even though this was a safe space, they would often be harassed by local law enforcement. And, it was just, Marsha was like, not tonight, we're not doing this. And, it got to a boiling point, but it was a community, again, standing up for each other, even at the risk of violence perpetuated by law enforcement. When you think about some of the things that marginalized communities have had to do, a lot of them, unfortunately, have started with violence. And I just want to get your reflection on that, especially as we know what the conversation is right now, Brownie, around police brutality and, really communities being fed up and using their voices.
Yeah. I think a big theme that I see, a lot of my social media presence and a lot of people that I follow on social media are part of the LGBTQ plus community. And a lot of people have been posting and trying to figure out what to post during Pride Month, because Pride Month is a big deal. It's a big celebration for us all. But there's a big theme that's going on that says the first Pride was a riot. And it talks about Marsha P. Johnson in that, and standing up to police brutality, standing up to people trying to tell you what to be, based on what you look like, who you love. And I think it's just a really big theme that we've all kind of come together in that way. And that's why the Pride flag is changing. The Pride flag now has brown and black. And I've seen also with the, I wish we could put like a little thing in there, but with the trans color there too. Because I think the LGBTQ plus community, like, although we came together at Stonewall and there's a lot of positive movement there, I think that there is a lot of white privilege in the LGBTQ plus community, especially for gay white men. And I think that there's a lot that they can do to help promote voices and to promote inclusion for the Black community as well. And that's something that I feel is now falling onto my shoulders a bit too, now that I am not a visible member of the LGBTQ plus community anymore. People see me as a white man, and I have a lot of responsibility to stand up for my other transgender siblings that might not have the passing ability that I do. And especially talking about Black trans women of color, the amount of violence that is put to that segment of the community it's sickening. It really is sickening on that. So that's something that's really, I think the LGBTQ plus community, yes, we're part of a minority. We have discrimination against us, but we don't, especially the white part, we need to fight for the rights, especially of Black trans women.
And there's two things that you said there that I'd love to tease out a little more. The first is this idea of passing, right? And of being someone that is a part of, again, that LGBTQ plus community that has some privilege there. And that was something that in the last episode I spoke with Liz Knox about, and she talked about passing in a way that honestly I had never thought about.
As a feminist myself, and I identify as gay, so and I'm obviously a woman, so when you talk about isms, like, yeah, there are some things working against me in my favor in terms of the white man's world. The benefit that I have is I have the choice to pass, right? So when we talk about women's hockey and where women's hockey fits in the world, by and large, we're trying to fit into a culture of hockey, which is predominantly, upper class white male. So when we're in a room full of hockey guys, like, yeah, I can pass in there, right? I can either perform heteronormative, or I can, you know, jock talk, or however it is, and I can find a comforting space in there, even if I'm a bit of a chameleon. The difference is that, you know, Black women, like black people in general, people of color, Indigenous people, you don't have that choice. You don't have the choice to pass. So whether it's in the culture of hockey, or you know, if you're a Black woman in a room full of white men, or, you know, going back to your isms, wherever you don't fit in, do you have the choice to not fit in? And you know, I think that's something that we don't often recognize as white women, because we see the NHL and we see the show, and in our lives, you know, that's the dream. We just want to be treated as equals. We want to be put on that pedestal and you know, play professional hockey, and that's all part of it. But you know, changing what that space looks like is also has to be part of our dream, because it needs to be more accepting. It's to everybody's benefit. And, you know, I hope to create a space that people don't feel the need to pass as anything more than themselves.
I'm curious, as you were coming up in hockey, you know, what were some of the more difficult things to deal with as a part of that, you know, kind of traditional hockey culture, and what were some of the conversations that you had regarding that concept of kind of, you know, kind of falling into that very white male centered hockey community?
Yeah, I obviously didn't. I've never played with Liz Knox, so we don't have the same experience. But she definitely does tap onto a few things that I've dealt with. For me, the language in the dressing room when I was younger, the language that was used was very homophobic. I would say it was in the dressing room. I said it. I went along with it. I didn't really know what I was saying. It was just people would say the F word a lot, or people would say that's so gay, and that was in my vocabulary. But it wasn't until I believe I was maybe 13 or 14, and there was a girl on my team. She was an assistant captain, so she had a leadership role within the team. And I had said something, maybe that's so gay, and she came to me. She's like, "Hey, like." It wasn't aggressive at all. She was just, I could just feel this disappointment. She said, "Hey, like my sister's bisexual and that language is really offensive. And it makes me feel like that you're putting her down." And that was the first moment where I was like, I understand that. I can see how my language is hurting somebody right now. And that's a conscious moment that I really go back to a lot when I think about language. And then for me, growing up as trans, I think inclusive language and gender neutral language is something that everybody needs to work on, myself included. Sometimes I don't even say gender neutral terms. And one thing that was really great with the hockey community is that there is an LGBTQ plus presence. I think when I was 13 or 14, I had that conversation. But then when I was around 18 was when people started to come out, and we started to kind of show ourselves in the dressing room and show our true selves. I didn't do it until I came out as transgender, but I did present as a gay woman. And something that I found was no one said, "Hey, what's your boyfriend's name?" Everyone talked about it as partners, because we were being inclusive of people in the dressing room. But I think it was a reactive statement, because then we knew that people were gay on the team. So it was like, oh, we're not going to just single out boyfriends and girlfriends. We're going to be all inclusive. So I think that was reactive, but there needs to be a better job of proactive language.
Yeah, I like that you offered that, because again, that's something honestly I had never thought of. And again, the ways that I identify, I probably wouldn't think of. Or, you know, something else that was something that I had to be more mindful of was not only understanding why some people choose to offer their pronouns when they're being introduced or when they introduce themselves to others, but also why it could be a good practice for me to also do that, even though I never felt the need to do that. And I'll be honest, first I was like, oh gosh, I'm like terrible at grammar. I'm like, I don't even really know what you're asking me. But yeah, American English is, we do not talk grammar very well, or maybe just me, said the writer. But yeah. But, once I got over that, I was like, okay, I had to think. I was like, all right, I'm seeing that, people are starting to use this more in. At the time, I was working as a child advocate, and there was actually this great organization called Make the Road New York. And in group sessions that they would facilitate, they really would lead the way. And I loved how they did it, because it wasn't something that they necessarily asked. They were like, this is how we conduct our meetings. If we're being asked to lead a meeting, this is what we're going to ask, and we'd like you to join us in doing this. And I just thought that was so great. And at first I was like, oh, do I have to do this? And then I was like, Erica, like, if you're saying you're a child advocate and these are a group of young people, and that's what is going to help them, then yeah, just go along with it. I think another thing sometimes in the hockey space, and this wasn't, it wasn't something that I had trouble with, but even the using defender instead of defenseman is something, that I think a lot of people sometimes struggle with. And again, I was like, why not just say defender? Like, it's just so much easier. But it's just those little things, right, that sometimes have to change.
Yeah. And I just want to like tap in on that, those pronouns. Like, for me, as soon as when I wasn't out, that's just a great way to be proactive. When I wasn't out, and now the practice of people introducing themselves with pronouns, like, it just makes you just feel like this is a safe space. Like, for me, when somebody goes out of their way and says their pronouns, even though they are a cisgender person that is extremely feminine or extremely masculine, and they say it, you're just like, oh, like, it's great. And then another thing, like, when I see somebody's pronouns in their email signature, I'm just like, I love that. I love to see it.
Yeah, let's do it. And actually, we didn't do that. I mean, I know your pronouns, and I'm pretty sure you know mine. But, Erica Ayala, she, her.
Harrison Browne, he, him.
Yeah. All right, there we go. See, there you go. Just we did it. But I think another piece of that, and again, we talked offline about this. Like, I really would love for this series to be a place where we can practice things like that with each other and for the hockey community. But I think that there are a few big questions that I think a lot of people are having right now as we see things play out, particularly and unfortunately after the killing of George Floyd. And that comes with these big ideas of, what is anti-racism? And I talked with Moose and Packer a little bit about that. But then also, what does intersectional allyship really look like? And that was something, again, that when you mentioned the LGBTQ plus community, and even now the flag changing, it looks a little more like the flag of my people, the Puerto Rican and Cuban flag with that little triangle now. So I like that. But again, for you, Harrison, what changes have you seen that you think are really important when it comes to, and you hinted on this a little, but I'd just like you to bring it home a little more, when it comes to intersectional allyship within, here we are in Pride Month and thinking about the LGBTQ plus community. What excites you about this, really the push toward more intersectional allyship?
Yeah, I think there are two ways of looking at it. I think there's some really great positives, and I also think there are some negatives to it as well. I think right now the mindset of, if not everybody's equal, then nobody is, right? So we're all pushing for the same goals. And I know that I'm speaking as a white person, as a white cis passing a male. So I know that I don't want to speak on behalf of communities and pretend that I know what it is to go through what people go through. There are safer people in segments, and I think that's where the intersectionality needs to be highlighted as much as possible. like fighting for gay rights, fighting for gay Black rights, fighting for trans Black rights, fighting for trans rights. It doesn't need to be broken up. Like, you don't need to put people into so many different types of boxes. But then there's also some people think of it. You have so many thoughts that you try to get out coherently, but it's you also don't want people to have a veil, like put a blanket over a group of people and have it all, like, people talk about Pride Month, Black History Month. Like, it is important for people to have those separate things. And that's where this Pride Month, I've been trying to really figure out how to effectively define those spaces and know where I can help. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. I think that is, I'm glad actually that you mentioned the challenge that intersectional allyship can present, because as someone who's pretty dialed into, you know, the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter and has been for a while, I do see that is a struggle. An example I'll give when we talk about, again, Black Lives Matter, is that the disproportionality when it comes to violence, and there's no mistaking that violence, statistically speaking, and a lot of the things that Black Lives Matter, that we're fighting to correct in an unjust system, that disproportionately affects Black men. That is something that is extremely important, and that really cannot be overstated. The full stop. However, there's also a history of, and you could go back to the March on Washington and Bayard Rustin, or so many other people that have been through the civil rights movement, and again movements for Black lives, where whether they identified as women, whether they identified as trans or gay, or along the LGBTQ plus, as a part of that community, that they were asked to step to the side, or to, their contributions were dimmed because perhaps that packaging of their full self was not at the moment what people felt was strategic to win the ultimate victory. And
Right.
That is really tough,
Yeah.
That's really tough to know why you want to focus on supporting and protecting a very specific group of people, but also feeling that while putting in all of that work, that you potentially are either more vulnerable or are not fully appreciated as who you are in the movement. And I think that's a really tough conversation, because you want to be supportive, but you also need to be real, and you need to challenge, like you said, if we're not all free, then none of us is free. And that sometimes is really tough, because, again, going back to the system and the systemic issue, there's a lot of strategy that goes into movements, and there are decisions that leaders make on, who is the best, quote unquote, to push the issue forward, and that can get really dicey.
No, and like, there's been like people talking about like all lives matter, and like those memes that have been put out with like the house on fire. That one really resonated with me, because I think that there are different tiers that we need to fight for, and it doesn't make any group less important in like it comes in, I think it just comes in stages, and we just have to know right now what is the most vulnerable group, and we need to put all of our force behind it. That's what I mean with that, is knowing who needs it the most, but it doesn't take away what other members of that group are going through.
Right. Yeah. And hopefully, that saying when the time is right seems odd, but that there will be a full understanding of all of the sacrifices that it took to push the needle forward, and that communities will then show up for those who showed up for them, I guess is the best way to say it.
And I think if you're not specific, if you're not targeted on something, you're dialed in on something, and you just try to spread out all of the different things, it's never gonna be done. Like it's gonna take 10 times longer if you try to spread everything out. I think right now everybody sees that we need to be laser focused.
Yeah. I think that again, those are like, that's the, you know, the double dutch of pushing forward.
Right.
You know, it also got me thinking of, I recently I had a conversation with You Can Play for NHL Seattle and what they're planning with their virtual Pride events. And Jonas Worth, he said that after the killing of George Floyd, that You Can Play as an organization, to a point that you mentioned earlier, really focused on how can they do Pride Month differently, and realizing and identifying that the way of storytelling in the past was not inclusive and perhaps did perpetuate, as you said, that there's, you know, kind of this image of, you know, being gay or being part of the LGBTQ community, which definitely skews to, again, white and male. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because I thought you had a really great conversation. I was a big fan of the YouTube series that you did, or your YouTube channel, but I think or I would hope that you remember that I really was impacted by your conversation with Erica Lawler.
Yeah.
You know, that was so, first of all, like hilarious. You two together was so much fun. There was just a lot of joy. But there was one moment that really, you know, impacted me. And it was when, you know, you were asking Erica essentially, you know, what were conversations in the locker room? And this was with the Riveters at the time. You two were on the Riveters together. What were the conversations, you know, when you weren't there, essentially? And, you know, what were some of the questions? And I think she was very honest. And she's like, yeah, I mean, of course we talk about you. Like, you know? But what I loved is that she was just like straight shooting. It's like, yeah, because we want to make sure that we can, as a team, make sure we're supportive of Harrison, or at least that's how I understood her, what she was saying. And so that does require us as a team without Harrison to deal with some of that.
The last one really hit home for me because it was directly against me. That's why it hit such a big nerve. And that's where I think everybody wants to get to that point where like it'll hit your nerve even if it's not about you. So that's something that I need to learn myself. That's something that everybody needs to learn. And that's where I think that we're all in right now, is that we don't necessarily understand. We see people hurting and we want to know where that hurt's coming from. That's being a good ally.
Your favorite Isobel Cup championship, tell the truth.
Oh no. You know, okay, they both were very, very, very great. I did not put my hand on that puck.
Right.
I didn't put my hand on that puck.
Heard it from Brownie.
I didn't.
Sticking to it.
Yeah, I was pissed. Yes, I can say 100% I did not.